Good morning to all of you out there, and welcome into this space. I bid you all welcome. I invite you to look around and see who you are here with. I invite you to turn your camera on if you feel comfortable so that you can say hello to your community. So I invite you all to take a moment and just to greet your neighbors, give them a wave, so that we all know that we are here in this space of learning and discovery, spiritual growth, wrestling with challenges, encouraging ourselves to become more fully the beloved community that we profess ourselves to be creating. So I welcome you all here into this beloved community in progress. We are the Unitarian Universalist Church of Lancaster, Pennsylvania, or UUCL for short, as we like to call ourselves, because it's less of a mouthful. I am Reverend Israel Buffardi. I am the minister of this congregation, and I use he, him for pronouns, and it's my pleasure to see all of you here this morning. Our mission here in this congregation is a mission, but it is also an invitation because it says, come, nourish the spirit, connect in love, act for justice. Come, meaning that we welcome in all here. And we are doing the best that we can. We are striving. We are trying to be better, to make space for the beauty and the wisdom that all of you bring, and the beauty and the wisdom and the community that comes from widening our circle of concern for who truly feels welcome here. Here in this congregation, we strive to do better, like I said, and we strive to learn from our mistakes and learn from our past and to forge a new path together that is more beautiful and more loving and more just. So no matter who you are, no matter where you are from, no matter who you love, no matter whether you have been harmed by religion, whether you grew up in this faith or another, whether you come here tentatively, seeking to explore and grow your own soul, grow your own spirit and knowledge, whether you have found your place in this community or whether you are still trying to. No matter how you understand what is sacred and most valuable in this world, whether you find wisdom and truth in science or the universe, nature, whether you find it in ancient traditions and metaphor and language, whether you believe in some version of a God or whether you don't, whether you are just content to let the great mystery be, welcome to this community. Come in and join us. And if you're just joining for the first, second, or third time and are still checking us out, I thank you for joining us. I thank you for checking us out. And I know that many of us were at one point entering into this space or some other UU congregation for the first time. And we all know what a brave step it can be to check out a new spiritual community. So we're glad you're here, and I welcome you to check us out on our website too to learn more about us. I'm going to invite us all now to enter into this hour that we spend together that we call worship. This sacred hour of intentionality and turning our attention to what is most valuable, most sacred in our lives, to the values that are most sacred and worthy of our attention. We do that here in this space by lighting a chalice, which is the symbol of our movement. And as I light this chalice, I invite us all to gaze upon its flame. Let this light that I am about to kindle call us to remember the light and the beauty and the wisdom that shines in all of your hearts. May this light illuminate for us the path as we travel into our collective future. May it illuminate for us the work that we need to do to make ourselves and our world more loving and more just. And may it warm our spirits together to give us the strength to meet the challenges that the world asks us to face. And lastly, may this chalice be the fire around which we gather to tell stories and envision the future of our world together. My friends, this month in our congregation, we are exploring the theme of widening the circle of concern, or simply just widening the circle. And this idea of widening the circle comes actually from a piece of work that our Unitarian Universalist Association created for us all to read and reckon with and wrestle with. It's called Widening the Circle of Concern, and it was created by what is called the Commission on Institutional Change, which is a commission that was commissioned by the UUA to look at the ways that our association of congregations, not just the National Association, but all the congregations that it's made of, all the people that it's made up of, the ways that we could be doing better and living into our values. The ways that we could better live into the essential promise of Unitarian Universalism, which is living into our interdependence and embracing a just and loving beloved community. This report, this commission was created in 2017, so it's not super old, and over the course of a few years, they put together this report called Widening the Circle of Concern that I've been asking all of us to read starting this month and discuss. And it took a look at the power structures in our organization and in our congregations and in our culture itself. And it told and tells some hard truths about our culture and about our congregations and about the culture of white supremacy that lives even within a progressive organization such as Unitarian Universalism. And it doesn't tell us that to make us feel bad about ourselves. It doesn't tell us that to berate the white people in this organization or to berate the people who carry privilege in this organization. It tells these hard truths because what we all know in our hearts, I think, that the vision that we carry as an organization, as a faith, the vision of a just and more loving world is possible, but it's not just going to come about by wishing it or wanting it to be so. It comes about, it will only come about when all of us call ourselves to do the work that we need to do to create our visions of equity. To name the hard truths. That's why we do this today. So over the next 6 weeks or so, we'll be looking at some of this work, and we'll be looking at some of the hard truths that it tells. But today, we're just going to focus just a little bit on the why, on the why are we doing this. So last May, I think it was, this congregation passed the 8th principle, which in Unitarian Universalism, we have 7 principles that promote who we are, and they promote our ethical and spiritual commitments to liberation, to wholeness, to democracy, to the interdependent web of life that we're all a part. But a lot of people were looking at those 7 principles and realized that there was an explicit naming that need to be said. And we've talked about the 8th principle before. The explicit naming that we need to be putting our energies intentionally towards not just being not racist as a culture, but being anti-racist in our actions and how we come together. So we passed this. This congregation is one of the, I've lost track of how many now, but a couple hundred or 150 or so who have passed the eighth principle, who have adopted it in addition to the seven principles. And if we're forgetting what it says, I'm just going to remind us. It says, we, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and in our institutions. We covenant to journey towards spiritual wholeness. Not to believe that we will get there perfectly or that we are there already, but to covenant to the fact that we need to be journeying always towards that promise. We work to build a diverse and multicultural institution through our actions that dismantle racism and oppression. But why is the question you might be asking. So I ask us for a second to just work backwards from that thought of what I just explained. Why are we covenanting to put our energy into dismantling systems of oppression and racism in our midst? Why are we working to build a multicultural, diverse, beloved community? I think the answer is right in there. It is the goal of journeying towards spiritual wholeness. It is not because we just want a more diverse community, because we want more people who aren't white or people who aren't over the age of 50 or people who have diverse economic experiences. It's not just because we want those things in our midst. It's because we know when those things are in our midst, they bring more beauty and more diversity of thought and something that will more closely resemble the beloved community. But we don't want it just for the sake of wanting it. We want it because we are journeying towards spiritual wholeness together. Because we say that we are not free until all of us are free. Or hear this quote by Lila Watson. She says, "If you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because you believe that your liberation is deeply bound up with mine, then let us work together." The eighth principle, the studying of this Widening the Circle of Concern report, is not about diversity for diversity's sake. It's about creating a community that is more open, more just, more loving, more able to receive the people who arrive here. It's about widening our circle to make space for the different ways of wisdom and truth and understanding and living that are possible in our culture, that are not snuffed out by the cultural norms of white supremacy that are so deeply embedded, not just in this congregation, but in our American culture as a whole. So we're going to talk about this more, but I'm going to leave it there for a few minutes so that you can think about that, and we'll come back to it. It is an aspirational tradition. That is so true. That is why we covenant to affirm and promote these things. It is not why, that is why we don't say that we are there or we think we can necessarily even get there in our lifetime, but we are covenanting to do those things together. So my friends, we gather here into this space today. There's a very long opening words for you today. I ask as we gather in and we prepare to think about this some more today and for over the next couple of months, that we gather into a space of creation together, of envisioning together, of becoming something together, and that we gather into a circle that we know is not complete. A circle that is in process of creation. A circle that must be open to change and growth. thank you for joining me today in this ever-growing, ever-changing circle of love and justice.
Do you hear, oh my friend, in the place where you stand, through the sky, through the land? Do you hear, in the heights on the plain, in the vale on the main, in the sun, in the rain? Do you hear, Through the roar, through the rush, through the throng, through the crush, do you hear in the hush of your soul, hear the cry fear won't still, hear the heart's call to will, hear a sigh startling shrill in your soul, From the place where you stand to the outermost strand, do you hear, oh my friend? Do you hear, all the dreams, all the dares, all the sighs, all the prayers? They are yours, mine and theirs. Do you hear,
We must listen, perceive, think together, and to the places where our hearts are calling us most to. For each other, for all of us. One of my least favorite parts about that hymn we just heard is there's a line that says, "They are yours, mine, and theirs." I really dislike that line, actually. I picked the hymn nonetheless because it does set up a us versus them dichotomy, which is absolutely not what I want you to be hearing today. So I invite you to pause now and to examine your heart. To examine what is in your heart and on your heart. What you carry on your shoulders, in your body. We come to this space with many different experiences. Joys, sorrows, concerns, complex truths that simple labels can never make sense of. The purpose of community, I believe, is to help us carry all those things together. The good, the bad, everything in between and outside of that. And we share them here with each other so that we know that we are not alone. Not so that we can fix each other's problems, but so that we know that we are not alone. To practice living into our interdependence by being together for all that we carry. So I invite you, you have a joy, sorrow, complex truth, or something that you prefer to put a different label on altogether. Something that you must name out loud or hear out loud to carry. I invite you to bring that into this space and to type it into our chat, and I will read it out loud for you so that you know that you are not alone. And I'll place a stone in our well for you when I do. My friends, there is a lot in this well this morning. So many joys and sorrows and complex truths. So much stuff of community and togetherness. So much wisdom, sorrow, and hopes and dreams lie in here. This is all of you and all that we carry together so that it can give us strength when we are apart. And so I invite you now, with all that you carry, with all that we carry, to take a moment to stop and to pause, to be present to life this morning with all that it brings. In the spirit of meditation or prayer, as some might call it, in the spirit of life itself. Take a moment to sit with yourself in the silence. And as you do so, do not forget to breathe. And as you breathe, know that you are breathing alongside each other. That you are breathing the same air as each other. The same air literally as your ancestors and our descendants. That as you breathe, you are breathing and living and bringing our world into being through each breath and each dream. But know that while breath might be easy for some of you this morning, others may be struggling to breathe as you breathe easily. And perhaps this very morning, this very moment, some might take their last breath. That each of us, my friends, one day will take our last breath. And whether it is today, tomorrow, or many years from now, it is our breath. It is our experience of life and our humanity that makes us one. That reminds us that we are all living and breathing and loving and dreaming on this earth together. May that knowledge move us to make this earth a more beautiful place for all of its people and creatures, for all of us. So let's spend some time together right now, reflecting on the things that matter to us and the things that we say matter to us. On becoming a more just and loving beloved community. Because that's what this is about. This conversation is not about berating anyone or making anyone feel bad, feel less than, feel like they have somehow failed at being a good Unitarian Universalist. That is not what this effort is about. It is about being who we say we are more actively. I wouldn't have this conversation with you if I didn't believe that being better, doing better weren't possible. And I hope that you wouldn't bother coming to this community if you didn't think that a better world was possible. And if you didn't think that a better you was possible. If you didn't think that a different, better you wasn't possible, wasn't a different, better you than the day you first walked into this door wasn't possible. Metaphorically speaking, if you walked into the Zoom door. And hopefully, even if today is your first time coming here. It is our task as a spiritual community to model the values and the behaviors and the dreams we have for our world in microcosm here in this community. That is one of the things that we do as a spiritual community. We practice our values with each other. Because the world, our country, is so steeped in white supremacy culture, so steeped in racism, that we have no choice but to do that with each other. It was Isabel Wilkerson who wrote the book Caste, who talked about how the United States is like a house that we all live in. And it is a house that we live in that was built upon a foundation of violence, of white supremacy, of racism, of forced labor. And those things, that culture of violence that created this house that we live in, it is the frame and the foundation of this house that we all live in together. And the frame of our house is crumbling, is rotting. The bricks are crumbling. The wood is falling apart. And it's a 400-year-old house that we all live in. Granted, none of us may have built the house ourselves. We did not build the foundation of violence, but we all live in the house together. And we're all responsible for repairing the foundation, for repairing the frame, if we want to continue at least to live in the same house together. So that is our job, to wrestle with that culture and to figure out how to rebuild this house together. So let me put it one other way. So I talk a lot about like reimagination and imagination and imagining what culture, how our culture could be different. And a lot of people in the Black Lives Matter movement talk about reimagining public safety, reimagining the relationship between communities and the people that are supposedly sworn to protect them, to make them safe for everyone. Now, these discussions are not meant to vilify any particular people who are part of that system, whether they be individual police officers or actual citizens in a community. It's about reimagining the ways that we come together in a community to care for each other and to care for the most vulnerable and to provide services for people who need them. I think I talked about this in a sermon. I don't remember exactly when it was, but it was several months ago. And some of you might remember it, and some of you maybe didn't even hear it. And I just remember that there was a lot of, I felt like I got a lot of pushback for giving that sermon by some people. And because we're in conversation with each other, and that's the way we're supposed to be in conversation with each other. But I guess I just want to say that if we think about this congregation as a microcosm of our society, of our culture, and we say that we are, we are a diverse, multicultural, beloved community, or at least that's what we're trying to do. We claim that we are a faith that makes space for diversity of thought, a faith that claims to be descended from progressive ancestors who spoke for liberation and abolition. And we call in people who might have identities that are more acutely aware of the racism in our culture. And when they show up in this space, if they are to see that, we wrestle with or have difficulty with even having a conversation about something like reimagining public safety. I just question of what message that gives to people when they come in here and what they see what our values truly are in practice. So this is, again, not meant to berate anyone. I know this is not me lecturing you about you're bad and I know all the good things and I'm here to tell you what's what. That's not what this is about. This is about encouraging us to have awkward and difficult conversations about the things that truly matter. So that's my way of saying that I hope that we can have more discussion and conversation about these things. Because if we can't have those conversations here, we can't have them in our daily lives. We can't go out into the community and be better. We can't become better people for everyone who's in our world, in our country, in our community. We can't expect Sunday morning to be a beloved community if we can't practice those things together and in our daily lives. So we are dedicating several weeks to having these conversations after the service, and we'll also be looking at very specific things in Widening the Circle that name some very awkward and hard to hear things that many people with varying different identities, including many people of color, have experienced in Unitarian Universalist congregations. ultimately, I think, let me put it this way. So in Unitarian Universalist congregations, a lot of you who come here, a lot of people who come here are smart people. Critical thinkers, people who have challenged the status quo in other religious communities, who have asked questions in religious communities, who ask questions in their life, who prefer to educate themselves and read and to know what's going on in the world, and people who care, people of conscience. That is, I think, what this community attracts a lot of. So a lot of you are smart, I know that, and you know a lot. And so what we're talking about here with all of this stuff is a cultural shift, right? So we're trying to sort of hack our cultural system, if you will, getting it to do something that it wasn't designed to do, because our culture was designed to put some people down and raise other people up. And we're trying to allow our culture, not allow it, we're trying to reform our culture, to reimagine our culture, to do something that it wasn't designed to do. So I want us to think of it as a different mental model than what we're used to. So I'm drawing something here. I wish I had a marker, but I don't. So here is a circle. And if you think about that as your life experience, so this is one way of looking at knowledge and wisdom and truth. If you think about that as your life experience, you know a certain amount, and some people know more than others. You know, maybe you know this much and somebody else knows this much, etc. And maybe if you know, have a lot of life experience, or if you went to a fancy grad school program or something like that, your experience kind of juts out in one little corner, right? You have, you know, if you have a PhD in psychology, maybe like this is general knowledge, and then this is maybe a bit more of what you know in that field, right? And this is a very individualistic cultural model of understanding truth and knowledge in the world, right? Does that make sense? Does it not make sense to anybody? We'll get there. So we're looking at truth and wisdom as being this sort of closed circle that individual. So here's the bit, important bit. Individual people have access to certain bits of truth and wisdom and knowledge, and also privilege to rights, privilege to being able to show up fully with who you are, and privilege to show up in this space and be seen as an individual and not just representative of some group that you're a part of some identity that other people have placed on you that they think you carry. And so each person has their own sort of circle of truth and knowledge and wisdom and privilege and expertise here, okay? And so any one person might only be able to kind of like poke out a little bit with their, you know, whether that's, you know, 30 years of experience doing whatever it is that you did in your life, or whether it's, you know, your fancy grad school program or your fancy whatever. That's kind of like us as a community. Now, that's an individualistic model. Now, do you see behind me, there's a circle? Is it a closed circle or an open circle? Yeah. It's an open circle. And so what we're doing here with cultural change is we're trying to change our mental model of how we look at the world. From a closed circle that looks at each individual's, in reality, I drew this circle really big, but in reality, like, if this is the plane of existence in the universe, right? Hold on. This is the universe. One person, even if you're like super privileged and know a lot and have a lot of experience, you might only have like that much of wisdom, right? I think if I were to draw a dot for myself, it'd probably even be smaller than that. If you were to think of, you know, all the stars in the sky kind of thing and who you are in the world. Now, if we go from this sort of Western European model of wisdom and expertise and knowledge, and we switch to a different way of knowing and being, which is a circle of life, of existence, of the world that we are all a part of, that we are all creating together, that is open rather than closed. And the reason that it's open is because it acknowledges that wisdom and truth and understanding are not, this is a very Unitarian Universalist idea too, are not something that one person has right and has all the answers to. That we need to have, so if you look at this circle, it's sort of like, it looks like water, it's flowing and it's moving. It's like a wave in the ocean. There's movement to it. And so okay, I'm gonna come back to this in 1 second. I hope I'm not losing you, but there's a Buddhist understanding of life that says your life is just sort of like it's like a wave in the water. And that your existence, your lifetime is sort of like a wave as it's traveling. And then when the wave hits the shore, it crashes and it disappears, sort of, if we look at ourselves as individuals, but it really just returns to the ocean and then it becomes something else. And so if we think of ourselves as all part of waves in the ocean, and we think of building a better, more just and loving world as being this circle, which is sort of like a wave. And this comes from another Zen Buddhist tradition, and it's called an enso. The practice of drawing these circles. And it represents imperfection in life, in our lives, in wisdom and knowledge. But it represents brokenness too, and movement and flow, recognizing that what we're doing together is opening up our circle, is cracking it open and making it part of a movement that we're engaging in. So rather than individuals, white culture that tells us that you have to be an expert, that you have to have all the answers, that only certain people have the answers, that only certain people have access to the answers and access to wisdom, rather than it being a single point that we each carry. We're part of this continuum of wisdom and knowledge. And so what we're doing here is trying to crack that open and see this in a different way. Let me offer thinking about it in another way that I think is maybe more directly tied to the eighth principle and being actively anti-racist together, and what we're really trying to do, I think. So Michael Kleber Diggs wrote a book called The Flavors of Black Joy. And he talks about culture of white violence, white supremacy, and and living in that as a Black person is like carrying a weight of a stone. And the weight of this is a quote now, the weight of the stone of living as a Black person in a country that is characterized by anti-Black violence and history. That's the house, the foundation, and the frame of the house that we all live in. Says, that's like carrying this stone, this weight, existing as a Black person in this country. And but that belonging in Blackness in a violent society is a source of community and solidarity. So belonging with other people sort of as part of this wave, rather than being a singular point that brings this is my interpretation, a singular point that brings just a one narrow view of an identity. He says, in his body and in his imagination and his sense of lineage, this forms a spacious, beautiful, joyful expression to be part of this belonging. And it's defiant of all of the pressures of the white gaze that confine and constrain. So that means of being seen as a Black person with a singular, narrow identity as just a Black person in this country confines and constrains and is a weight that is carried. But that to be seen as an individual, as part of a whole, as an individual with individual concerns and a life and love, that is liberating and joyful. But I think also another really important part of this, right, and this is a conclusion that's made, is that the stone of the weight that can weigh Black people down in this society, in our culture, the stone is heavy, but it's heavy, and the stone, the weight is not Black identity itself. It's not being a Black person. It's not Blackness, but it is the white gaze. It is the way that white people view Black people, the way that our culture views people of color, the way that our white supremacy culture puts expectations. It is not the identity of Blackness itself, which is a beautiful individual thing, just like anything else. The burden is what the white gaze does to people of color. So what we're trying to do as a community, as a culture, is to open ourselves up. I have so many notes here today that I don't have time to talk even about half of them. This is incredible. This hasn't happened to me before. I think these concepts, this idea is, I think probably it can be awkward for a lot of people to talk about, and it's not easy to talk about. So it takes time. And I'm going to come back to a lot of these notes because I think a lot of these things need to be said. And I feel like I've only just scratched the surface, but that's why we're going to be talking about this stuff for a little while. Let me say that to all of us, and I guess I speak specifically to my fellow white people, that okay. Gloria Steinem said that we don't just live in the patriarchy, that the patriarchy lives in us. Maybe you've heard that quote before. And so we're trying to pull that out, expose it. The patriarchy, white supremacy culture, whatever you want to call it, is something that we're trying to expose and pull out and separate our own ego for the need to be, to think that we can live in a messed up society that is violent, based in violence, and not be a part of that is not possible. It lives in all of us. And so we have to separate our ego from this process of hearing my words today and thinking that I'm telling you that you are a bad person because you have that thing that lives inside of you. None of you are bad people. Some of you annoy me sometimes, but none of you are bad people, and I probably annoy you sometimes. We're all struggling to be better together. That's what we're doing here. So we have to remove our ego, and I'm almost done here, I promise. We have to remove our ego from this process. See ourselves as waves in the ocean. See our knowledge and wisdom and experience as part of this unbroken circle that is ever expanding and growing and turning. No. Well, just will you choose to protect someone else over your own ego is the question. Have you built the capacity to care more about others than you care about your own ego? Because we all get it wrong. And we're doing this in the service of collective liberation. Remember I said at the beginning? If you come here to help me, what did I say? If you come here to help me, we can't talk, but if you come here because you believe that your liberation is deeply tied up with mine and with others, then you're in the right place. And we can set off on a journey together, imperfectly. And we can widen our circle together. I end with one thought. Some things. We live in a time when many of us are concerned for the future of our country. I'm going to stop. Concerned about the breakdown of democracy. Thank you for being in conversation. The climate crisis. So I say, whatever terrible regimes that might be in our future, whatever breakdown of the climate that might be in our future, whatever way challenges that might lie ahead for us or not, it is necessary to cultivate a culture of care and concern now, because if these things ever happen, if they get worse, it will be
I've said enough
the
today.
privileged people who will feel them less harshly, who will feel the sting of that less, who will be affected less. And it will be some people whose traditional understanding of their knowledge and wisdom is smaller, that they will feel the sting of those things more. And so we have to create a culture of care and concern that is moving for everyone now. I don't know what crises we may or may not avert, but I do know that we can draw our strength together and that we can find a way forward through those things, whatever may come. And I think that, to me, makes this wrestling with this issue equally as important as any political crisis that we might experience. Because systems are made up of individuals who are affected by the system. And within a crappy system, we have the ability to make it better for each other.
Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea, move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
We now take an offering as an outward expression of our interdependence within this church and in the wider community. You can support our work as you are able by texting the amount of your donation to the number on your screen or through the Contribute tab on our website at UUCLonline.org. This month, we continue to share half of the offering with Crispus Attucks Community Center, a nonprofit that supports the preservation of African-American cultural heritage and empowers youth and families to reach their full potential. Please give generously. Thank you.
From the light of days remembered burns a beacon bright and clear, guiding hands and hearts and spirits into faith set free from beams of youthful vision comes a new prophetic voice, which demands a deeper justice built by our courageous choice. When the fire of commitment sets our mind and soul ablaze, when our hunger and our passion meet to call us on our way, when we live with deep assurance of the flame that burns within, then our promise finds fulfillment and our future can begin. Cool, second.
So I wanted to make sure I extinguish our chalice this week. And as I do, I just want to say, we have a quote for us from Leslie Jamison, a novelist, who says, "So what we're trying to do here is increase our empathy and increase our vision of ourselves as part of a larger whole." Leslie Jamison says, "Empathy isn't just remembering to say that must be really hard. It's figuring out how to bring difficulty into the light so it can be seen at all. Empathy means acknowledging a horizon of context that extends perpetually beyond what you, or I would add any individual, can see." It's about acknowledging a horizon of context, of wisdom, of knowledge, of understanding that extends perpetually beyond what any one of us can see. So as I extinguish our chalice, your job is to take the light with you and to let it shine in the world, illuminating that horizon of context that extends perpetually beyond our own narrow individual visions of wisdom and truth and understanding. Our service has ended.